1800. The first black codes were enacted. Gabriel Prosser planned a rebellion in Virginia, but it got suppressed. 1807. At the request of Thomas Jefferson, Congress passed the act prohibiting importation of slaves from abroad. 1808. Importing slaves is now a felony. This is the earliest day under the U.S. Constitution that a law could be made restricting slavery. 1816. Bishop Richard Allen founded the first separate black denomination, African Methodist Episcopal, or AME. Robert Finley began the American Colonization Society. It was created to send free black Americans to Liberia in West Africa. 1817. The first Black American Baptist Church had its beginnings. Although blacks couldn't legally assemble, the congregation grew to 220 by 1829, with services held with owner permission for the enslaved majority.
The permission slips?
1822. Denmark Vesey planned a rebellion. It was suppressed. 1827. Freedom Journal, the first black American newspaper in America, begins publication. 1829. David Walker begins publication of abolition and pamphlet Walker's Appeal. 1830. The Cherokee, the Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, also known as the 5 civilized tribes, owned black slaves that were relocated to Oklahoma during the Trail of Tears. Josiah Henson, the inspiration behind Uncle Tom's Cabin, arrived in Canada. 1831. William Lloyd Garrison publishes The Liberator. He declares that ownership of slaves is a great sin. Nat Turner leads the most successful rebellion in American history. The rebellion was suppressed, but after many deaths. 1832. Sarah Harris Fairweather is admitted to Prudence Crandall in Connecticut, which led to the school's forcible closure under Connecticut's black law. 33. American Anti-Slavery Society is founded by William Garrison. Frederick Douglass became a key leader. 35. The Black Seminole Rebellion saw the Black Seminoles, runaway slaves, and Seminole Indians unite to resist the U.S. government's forced removal from Florida, fighting for their freedom against slavery. The first recorded lynching occurred in St. Louis, Missouri, when a black man named Francis McIntosh was seized by an all-white mob, chained to a tree, and burned alive in front of a large crowd. 37. The first Institute of Higher Education for Black Americans was founded. Black Seminoles achieved a significant military victory against U.S. forces fighting for freedom alongside Native Americans in Florida. 1838. U.S. Marshal Bass Reeves was born. The fictional character, the Lone Ranger, was based off of him. 1839. July 2nd. Slaves revolt on the La Amistad, an illegal slave ship, resulting in a hearing before the U.S. Supreme Court. 1840. The Liberty Party breaks away from the American Anti-Slavery Society due to grievances with William Lloyd Garrison's leadership. 42. The U.S. Supreme Court rules that states do not have to offer aid in the hunting or recapture of slaves, greatly weakening the fugitive slave law. 43. Isabella Baumfree a former slave, changes her name to Sojourner Truth and begins to preach for the abolition of slavery. Henry Highland Garnett delivers his famous speech, Call to Rebellion. 45. Manifest Destiny was a term that outlined the colonists' belief that America was destined, ordained by their God to be theirs. Frederick Douglass published his groundbreaking autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, a powerful account of his experiences with slavery, detailing brutal conditions, his fight for literacy, and his escape, which became a pivotal work in the abolitionist movement, revealing names and locations previously withheld. 47. Frederick Douglass begins publication of the abolitionist newspaper, the North Star. Joseph Jenkins Roberts, a Virginian, becomes the first president of Liberia. 49. Roberts vs. Boston seeks to end racial discrimination in Boston public schools. Harriet Tubman escapes from slavery to Philadelphia and begins helping other slaves to escape via the Underground Railroad. 1850. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, a controversial part of the Compromise of 1850, strengthened the laws requiring the capture and return of escaped enslaved people, even into free states, imposing penalties on anyone who aided them and denying due process to suspected fugitives. The federal mandate forced Northern citizens and officials to participate in slavery's enforcement, sparking widespread outrage, violent resistance, and significantly increasing national tensions over slavery, pushing the country closer to the Civil War. (1851). Sojourner Truth gives her "Ain't I a Woman" speech at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. 1852. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe is published. 53. The President's Daughter is the first novel published by an African American. 1854. President Franklin Pierce signs the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which repeals the Missouri Compromise and allows slaves to be brought to the new territories. In opposition to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Republican Party is formed with an anti-slavery platform. 1855. John Mercer Langston is one of the first Black Americans elected to public office when elected as town clerk in Ohio. 56. The sacking of Lawrence in Bleeding, Kansas. John Brown, whom Abraham Lincoln called a misguided fanatic, retaliates for Lawrence's sacking in the Potawatomi Massacre. An enslaved man named Nearest Green began teaching Jack Daniel how to make whiskey. Uncle Nearest served as the first master distiller for the Jack Daniel distillery. 57. In Dred Scott v. Sanford, the U.S. Supreme Court upholds slavery. This decision is regarded as a key cause of the American Civil War. 58. The United States Attorney General issued an opinion, concluding that inventions by enslaved and free African Americans were unpatentable. Over the course of America's 250-year chattel slavery, many slaveholders took credit for their slaves' inventions. There is no way of knowing how many inventions should be credited to Black Americans. 59. In Abelman v. Booth, the U.S. Supreme Court rules that state courts cannot issue rulings that contradict the decisions of federal courts. August 22nd, the last known slave ship to arrive to the U.S. docks in secrecy at Mobile, Alabama. 1860, Arizona passes an expulsion act banishing all free blacks from the state. Abraham Lincoln is elected president. As a crucial, urgent effort to reconnect kin separated by slavery, Black American family reunions begin, with roots extending from the pre-Civil War era through the immediate aftermath of emancipation. While the formalization of the 13th Amendment in 1865 spurred widespread organized searches, the desire and efforts to reunite broken family units began even earlier. 1861. The American Civil War begins. Texas prohibits the freeing of slaves. South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina form the Confederate States. Jefferson Davis is their president. 75,000 blacks volunteering for the Army are rejected. First Confiscation Act authorized Union to seize Confederate property, including slaves used to support the rebellion. Slaves seeking refuge with the Union are considered contraband of war. 1862, money was offered to states for emancipating slaves. 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation goes into effect, changing the legal status of 3 million slaves from slave to free. 1864, the Fugitive Slave Law is repealed. 1865, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime. The Freedmen's Bureau was established, created partly to redistribute confiscated land from Southern whites. It gave legal title for 40-acre plots to freedmen. After the war, Andrew Johnson returned most of the land to the former white slave owner. The Freedmen's Bureau handled disputes, handed out food and clothing, started schools, and protected freedmen from the Ku Klux Klan. Six Confederates started the Ku Klux Klan. This group was used to terrorize black citizens. The Klan functions as a paramilitary arm of Southern segregationist governments. It allows members to kill with impunity and eliminate activists without alerting federal authority. The Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company, also known as the Freedmen's Bank, was established in 1865 to help former slaves become financially stable. Black Americans, specifically formerly enslaved people in Charleston, South Carolina, initiated the first known Memorial Day observance on May 1st, 1865, by giving proper burials and holding a large procession for fallen Union soldiers, many of whom died fighting for emancipation. This event honored the sacrifice of black soldiers and was a foundational act of remembrance for the Civil War dead, predating national observances and celebrating freedom, though this history was suppressed for a time by white Southerners.
Dirty, don't you say that.
Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. June 19th, the Negro, now called freedman, received the news that enslavement has ended. They blended June with 19 and called it Juneteenth, the Freedmen's Independence Day. The Black Codes aim to limit the economic, political, and social opportunities of Black people, effectively reestablishing a system of control over their lives and labor. These laws were designed to restrict the freedom of newly freed African Americans and maintain a system of racial hierarchy. 1866. Buffalo Soldiers were Black American regiments formed in 1866 to serve on the American frontier, known for their bravery, perseverance, and vital roles in westward expansion by protecting settlers, building infrastructure, and fighting in conflicts like the Indian Wars, earning their name from Native Americans who respected their dark, curly hair and fierce fighting spirit. They served with distinction in the segregated U.S. Army for decades, undertaking duties from patrolling harsh terrain to participating in the Spanish-American War, and are remembered as pioneers who broke racial barriers in the military. The Treaty of 1866. The 1866 Reconstruction Treaty, signed with the 5 civilized tribes, stipulated that freed slaves and people of African descent living among the tribes would gain the same rights as native tribal citizens, including the right of suffrage. (1868) 14th Amendment granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including formerly enslaved people, and guaranteed equal protection under the laws, also prohibiting states from denying due process. 1870. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, prohibits the federal and state governments from denying or abridging the right to vote based on color, race, or previous condition of servitude, ensuring voting rights for freedmen. Former Confederate states implemented a poll tax and literacy tests to discourage freedmen from voting. The Ku Klux Klan terrorized Black citizens for exercising their right to vote, running for public office, and serving on jury. In response, the Congress passed a series of enforcement acts to end violence and empower the president to use military force to protect Black Americans. The Enforcement Act of May 1870 prohibited groups of people from banding together or to go in disguise upon the public highways or upon the premises of another with the intention of violating citizens' constitutional rights. Even this legislation did not diminish harassment of Black voters in some areas. Hiram Revels, an AME minister, becomes first freedman to serve in Congress. 1871. Ku Klux Klan Act, the KKK, and the Knights of the White Camellia formed to enforce the Black Codes and terrorize the freedmen. 1872. Elijah McCoy, invented the automatic lubricating cup for steam engines, which revolutionized industry by allowing machines to self-lubricate while running, leading to the phrase, the real McCoy. He also patented the portable ironing board, a lawn sprinkler, rubber heels for shoes, and tire treads. 1873. Over 100 black Americans were murdered by white supremacists near Colfax, Louisiana. The massacre of black citizens and voters was among the most devastating acts of terrorism to take place during Reconstruction, though the contested memory of what white community members called a riot has until recently been hotly debated since. (1874) Fraud bankrupted the Freedmen's Bank. 61,144 people lost approximately $3 million, $68.2 million in today's currency. The money mysteriously disappeared, leading to the Freedmen's distrust of the banking system. Mattress money. 1875. Civil Rights Act guaranteed freedmen equal treatment in public transportation, public accommodations, and jury services. 1876. The Pig Law, a colloquial term for post-Reconstruction Southern state laws, criminalizing minor offenses to re-enslave black freedmen through harsh sentencing and the convict leasing system. These discriminatory black codes forced unpaid labor, punishing trivial acts with years in prison, creating a new form of bondage after slavery ended. The purpose of the Pig Law was to control black labor and maintain white supremacy by creating a new forced labor system. It made petty theft a serious felony, leading to long prison sentences. It also criminalized being unemployed. Convicted individuals, disproportionately black, were leased out to private companies for unpaid labor, essentially replacing slavery. It also criminalized being unemployed, forcing black men into exploitative labor contracts. In essence, Pig laws were part of the oppressive black codes, a systemic effort to strip freedmen of their liberty and economic potential, creating a system of involuntary servitude well into the 20th century. 1877. Rutherford B. Hayes ended Reconstruction with the Compromise of 1877. 85. The Jim Crow era. The Jim Crow laws were state and local laws introduced in the southern United States that enforced racial segregation, Jim Crow being a pejorative term for a freedman. 1896. Segregation is reestablished in the southern states. 1898. The Wilmington Massacre was a municipal-level massacre that was carried out by white supremacists in Wilmington, North Carolina. The Democratic coup leaders flooded newspapers with fake stories about black men attacking white women. 2,000 armed whites stormed the city, burned black newspapers, executed elected officials, and forced the legitimate government to resign at gunpoint. They machine-gunned fleeing freedmen, then photographed the dead bodies and printed the images in newspapers in the South. This overthrow was celebrated nationally. America's only democratically elected interracial government was erased from history.
Until now.
In the midst of the storm, the freedmen pushed on. Not only did they survive, they thrived.